Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning. Your Excellencies, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, distinguished guests and participants, on behalf of Universitas Pajajaran, I am honored to welcome you all at the International Conference with the theme, Rethinking Emerging Forces, Enhancing the Role of Scholars in Promoting People-Driven Asian-African Partnership. First of all, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, Indonesian Institute for Sciences, Mr. Darwis Khudori, and the UNPAD Asian African Research Center, who have been co-organizing this event. So today, we can gather together in Bandung as part of the commemorations of the 60th anniversary of the 1955 Pan-African Asian Conference. Second, I also would like to extend my warmest welcome to all delegates and participants for attending this international event. I'm very pleased to see so many representatives from Asian African countries, many of whom academicians as well as scholars. During this year's commemorations of Bandung Asian African Conference, one of the adopted outcome documents is the declarations on reinvigorating new Asian African strategic partnership. One of the clauses is the importance to build society network. In this case, academicians as epistemic communities. The other clause is the initiations of Asian African Academic Forum and network of Asian African think tank. Also to see how far is the role of Indonesian leadership in promoting the values of Bandung spirit. To implement this mandate, for the past 6 months, the Asian African academicians, the UNPAD Asian African Research Center, co-partner with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia and Indonesian Institute of Sciences have working together to hold this international event as the first academic forum where researchers, academicians, as well as scholars from Asia and Africa come together to discuss issues on Asia and Africa from many perspectives: politics, history, economy, gender, ecology, culture, and religion. On the other hand, as the focal point of Indonesia for Asian African scholar networking all around the world, the Asian African Research Center, or Pusat Kajian Asia Afrika, Universitas Pajajaran, would like to introduce to all of you our goals and activities, which are hand in hand with the proposed and mandates adopted in NAASP document. As a newborn research center, it is not easy to do both fast and big steps in a short period of time. But around 6 months after the establishment, this research center has been actively conducting programs such as collaborative research, focus group discussion, and public lecture on Asian African issues, and also publishing a monthly bulletin, namely Asian African Updates. Small steps, but hopefully it could be done sustainably. In the future, hopefully, the center will engage more and more with the other research center on Asia Africa, also with the Asian African epistemic communities. And in the end, it could bring advantages and benefits, not just for the development of Asian African countries, but also for a better strategic partnership between Asia and Africa. Your Excellencies and participants, there would not be magic formulas on building beneficial and effective engagement on academic network, nor think tank. But I believe open and serious discussion could be a step forward in finding the best answers. This first forum is only a beginning, and we will have more forums in the near future. Today, I invite all of us to be open and creative in our discussion, and to all presenters to share their best experience on the issues. Once again, I would like to thank you all for coming. Your experience, expertise, and readiness to share your knowledge and ideas are highly valuable and needed. I wish to all of us fruitful discussion, interesting findings and observations. Also, I wish all of you to have pleasant and great experience in Bandung, the capital city of Asia, Africa. So enjoy the conference. Thank you so much. Good morning and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Excellency Master Sudirman Hasek, yang kami hormati Ibu Wakil Dekan Fakultas Ilmu Politik Universitas Pajajaran, the Honorable Dr. Darwis Khudori. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me welcome you all to the historic city of Bandung. On behalf of the government of Indonesia, it is also an honor for us to host such important conference here in Bandung. This city will always a special place when we talk about Asia, Africa. This is the place where leaders of Asia, Africa stood up, calling for a more just, equal, and prosperous world. The 10th principle of Bandung was adopted by 21 newly independent nations of Asia, Africa, who gathered here with the spirit to abolish any form of colonialism, imperialism, injustice, and to get their rights as an independent nation. That is the spirit which we now call as the Bandung spirit, the spirit that was born in this very place. Distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we carry on the spirit that our founding fathers inherited. Indonesia too is incumbent to organize a series of events to commemorate the 60th anniversary of ASEAN-African Conference 6 months ago. Taking the theme of strengthening South-South cooperation to promote world peace and prosperity, the event was attended by 21 heads of state and government, 32 delegates, 15 observers countries, 10 international organizations, as well as 650 representatives of the business community coming from ASEAN and African countries. In order to make the event more meaningful, 2 other events were held in conjunction with the main commemorating conference that are: 1, Asia-Africa Business Summit, attended by 650 businessmen from Asia and Africa. The event produced Jakarta Joint Declaration on the revitalization of the ASEAN-African Partnership for Progress and Prosperity, and agreed on the formation of the ASEAN-African Business Council. And the event number 2 is ASEAN-African Parliamentary Conference. The event reaffirmed the commitment of the ASEAN-African Parliamentary Group to accelerate interaction and cooperation between ASEAN and African Parliament. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, indeed, the summit has enabled countries in the region to strengthen partnership among themselves, share experiences, and set priorities in pursuing economic development in the two continents. The summit also provided an opportunity to find practical solutions to address common challenges through collaborative efforts. The success of the summit sent out a message to the world that there remain global imbalances in the world today. For far from equal, far from fair, and far from justice. This global imbalance is reflected by the rich countries, which is only about 20% of the world population, consume about 70% of our planet resources. It is also manifested by thousands of people living in the northern hemisphere who enjoys super rich, while 1.2 billion people living in the southern hemisphere are still struggling with poverty. The summit attempted to address this through adopting three important documents, namely the Bandung+60, the reinvigorating the ASEAN-African New Strategic Partnership, and the Declaration on Palestine. The outcome document of the summit echoes the voice of ASEAN and African nations in the world. It is elaborated that the three pillars of cooperation and reaffirm ASEAN and African countries' commitment to work together toward political solidarity, economic development, and stronger socio-cultural relations. Our call toward a new global economic order would ensure that the voice of developing countries is heard, and the emerging economies will have greater involvement in the effort of continuing the vulnerability of countries being dragged down into a new form of economic and political domination. This is also reflected in the common agenda of global governance reform, particularly the United Nations and the global financial institutions. The spirit of Bandung thus remain relevant for today's context, as it encompasses code and principle of how we conduct relations with each other. You all have discussed a broad range of issues yesterday, which covers how the spirit serves as a beacon of the continuing effort of the people for peace and prosperity. I believe that it is through collaborative and concerted efforts of all countries we have better chance to resolving this complex and multi-layered challenges that we are facing today. Without a proper plan of action and implementation, mere commitment certainly would not enough to address today's challenges. Hence, Indonesia, together with all countries from Asia and Africa, has the responsibility to implement the commitment that have been made. Distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen, moving on to the next point that I want to make is that how the Bandung spirit should be best manifested into the conduct of countries to answer the major challenges that we said earlier. I believe a strong and well-restructured South-South cooperation will be an effective vehicle to implement the political vision and of the African-ASEAN partnership. It is because South-South cooperation is an expression of genuine solidarity among ASEAN and African countries, as well as reinforce ourselves from within. South-South cooperation can also be complemented with strong cooperation with our development partners through tripartite cooperation. In this regard, the success of recent ASEAN-African Summit has also been indicated by the ability to attract influences and enthusiasm and commitment from many developed partners to cooperate with developing countries, including Indonesia, in providing technical cooperation and capacity building program. To mention a few, there is a triangular cooperation between Indonesia and Turkey for the Palestine, a triangular cooperation between Indonesia and Norway for Afghanistan, and a triangular cooperation between Indonesia and Japan for African countries. Such cooperation reflects Indonesian commitment to continuously enhance the South-South cooperation. Distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen, for Indonesia, another upsetting fact is when the promise of the Bandung spirit for independence for each nation in Asia Africa leave 60 years of debt to people of Palestine. Indonesia will continue to support the Palestine struggle to establish an independent and sovereign state and remain active to urge other countries to recognize Palestinian independence. In this context, equally important as gaining its independence, Indonesia would also like to ensure that Palestinian people have adequate capacity to govern itself as the independent state. Hence, Indonesia's assistance to Palestine in the field of capacity building will be further enhanced. For this reason, Indonesia has continuously been providing technical assistance and capacity building program for Palestinians, such as diplomatic training program for Palestinian diplomats that has been around since 2008. Once again, I call you, the distinguished scholars from ASEAN Africa countries, to unite in rendering your support to Palestine as well as developing cooperation on capacity building program. I have a profound belief that through continuous political support, technical assistance, and capacity building program, Palestine will be able to be a strong and independent state in the near future. Distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia encouraged a more concerted efforts in order to in other priority areas such as maritime, food, infrastructure, tourism, and energy resources that are easily accessible and managed in a sustainable manner. Through the scheme of the South-South and triangular cooperation, Indonesia believes that this is one particular way of demonstrating the strength and of the solidarity of our peoples. The capacity building program that entails in this cooperation is one of the strong points in to materialize the Bandung spirit. Distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen, another initiative that Indonesia put forward is the establishment of the Asia-Africa Center. The center will be used as an information center in order to prepare the South-South cooperation program for capacity building in ASEAN and African countries. To our view, this is a sort of ambitious body of secretariat type to facilitate the program implementation under the framework of ASEAN-African Strategic Partnership. The center will also be complemented with the establishment of the ASEAN-African Network of Think Tank division. The division serves as the important component in bringing the two regions closer and forming the web of intellectual and knowledge. The involvement of the academician is quite important in the development of the region. The result of studies by academicians can be used as a basis or reference in policy and decision-making process. The center will need to be developed further and thus would be benefited by some valuable input from all of you. Distinguished speaker, participants, ladies and gentlemen, I have a strong belief that only through closer cooperation, ASEAN and Africa nations will be able to address common challenges. The message that our founding fathers once inspired us is to let the ASEAN-African countries to grow and develop together through the ASEAN-African Partnership. We already have the political push to forge this partnership, and right now it is up to us as part of the many communities to implement it. At least I would like to challenge you all, scholars and academics, to come up with a fresh and implementable recommendation to make all of our recommendation and post-mentioned concern and objective to be fully addressed and achieved. Your support and commitment is awaited. Have a productive deliberation. Thank you very much and good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good morning, everybody. Hope you feel well and you feel the natural mystic of Bandung. They say that repetition is pedagogical. I will speak with my French language in mind, so excuse me if sometimes it's not so fluent. Yesterday I mentioned the coincidence that the 60th anniversary of Bandung reminds me of the Dogon people, the people in the hills, in the Bandiagara mountains in Mali, because they used to have their ritual meeting every 60 years, they still do it. And this meeting was linked to the Sirius star. And what is amazing is that they were able to study Sirius and the movement of Sirius without the modern instruments. And French astronomists have studied how they did it. They did it in the hills with the stones, how to observe the stars, how to observe the movement of the sun, which means we have to make an epistemological rupture and believe in our capacity as people from the south, able to invent, as China has invented the printing, the gunpowder, the powder, Harrak, the mathematics, the zero, many things that have been hidden because the narrative of the history of science is focused on the so-called inventions made in Europe or in the Western world. So this is just to put us in the atmosphere of believing in our capacity, in the capacity of our people to invent a new future for a better world. And this is what we have to do today. I have an impressive panel with, how we say in French, the poids lourd, heavyweight people, and it's a responsibility. So now we have 8 minutes ahead, or we have already used 8 minutes. It's 23 past 10. This panel is about Bandung spirit, what role for an alternative global governance. I think we have already begun this discussion. We need a platform. There are many platforms in the South, but we as Bandung spirit, how can we contribute as a new platform to an alternative global governance? What are our capacity? What is our added value? That's why we have to discuss in this panel. And for that, I want to quote the African historian Issa Shivji, who said in the silence in the NGO discourse, the role and future of NGOs in Africa. He said, history is not about assigning or sharing blame, nor is it about narrating the past, which must be forgotten and forgiven, or only remembered once a year on Remembrance of Heroes or Independence Days. History is about the present. History is about the present. We must understand the present as history so as to change it for the better. So, having that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, I want to shortly introduce myself. I'm Lazare Ki-Zerbo from Burkina Faso. I'm a philosopher, and I'm based in Paris, working on Pan-Africanism in the Joseph Ki-Zerbo Committee. And I will give the floor now to Darwis Khudori for an intervention of maximum 20 minutes, but you can do shorter and introduce yourself when you take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman Lazare Ki-Zerbo. So, I don't think that I need to speak for myself, because I am one of the motivator, coordinator of this event. Since I don't see screen there, so I need to be in front of the screen in order to explain what I have put on the screen. So please, do you have any microphone for me? Microphone. No, okay. I will take it.
Yeah, so I propose to speak about the Bandung spirit as a tool of analysis of the global present. Yeah, and I will introduce four concepts or four notions. Bandung spirit. Yeah, four notions: Bandung spirit, NEFOS, or new emerging forces, and then emerging countries. Okay, and then I borrow term from Professor Mohanty, global restructuring and global rebalancing. You will develop this point, I think, in your speech. Bandung spirit. There are many. Every time we heard about Bandung spirit, but what is exactly Bandung spirit? There is no definition. If you look at all the literature of Bandung Conference, there is no one who defines what is Bandung spirit. Some say that it is spirit of non-alignment. Others say that it is solidarity. Others is anti-colonialism or for independence. Myself, I try to introduce the Bandung spirit, to interpret what is Bandung spirit based on the final declaration of the 1955 Bandung Asian African Conference. I saw that there are 5 elements of Bandung spirit. The first is a call for coexisting, peaceful coexistence among the nations. The second, liberation of the world, not only Asia, Africa, liberation of the world from any domination, hegemony of superpowers, domination of one country by another. So the key word is liberation. The third, this is the equality of races and nations. And the fourth is solidarity toward the poor, the colonized, the exploited, and those being weakened by the world order. And the fifth is for their development. So this is the 5 elements of Bandung spirit. Now we can see the world, the state of the world today, starting from this point of view. Peaceful coexistence. Do we live now in peaceful coexistence among the nations, among the people? Wars, conflicts happen or continues to take place not only among the nations but also inside the nations. So we are yet in peaceful coexistence. The second, liberation. Are we really liberated from any domination? In economy, in politics, in military, in armament. The third, equality. Is the objective of equality between races and nations already achieved? Apartheid. Did apartheid disappear or still exist? And the fourth is solidarity. Do we have enough solidarity so that nobody
is dying because of hunger, because of diseases. And development. What kind of development that we follow now? What model of development we follow? That's yesterday I quote the discourse or the speech of Carlos Romulo, as I said during the 1955 Bandung conference. Carlos Romulo is one of the orators, strong orator. Although he is friend of America, he is pro-American, but he criticized America, and he said also in one of his speech, do Asia and Africa have to follow the way of development of United States and Europe? So development is the question. This is what I propose as a tool of analysis of the state of the world today. Second notion, NEFOS, new emerging forces. This concept was invented by Sukarno. And what is exactly new emerging forces? He explained in one of his speech in 17th of August 1963, which is the date of independence of Indonesia. Every year Sukarno gave speech during the independence celebration. So I quote the rhetoric of Sukarno. I translated from Indonesian. New emerging forces are gigantic forces consisting of progressive nations and groups. So not only nations, but also groups, willing to make a new world full of justice and friendship among the nations, a new world full of peace and well-being, a new world without imperialism, colonialism, and exploitation de l'homme et de nation par nation. You know that Sukarno speaks also French, so he used German French. New emerging forces consist of oppressed and progressive nations. New emerging forces consist of Asian, African, and Latin American nations, socialist nations, and progressive groups in capitalist states. New emerging forces consist of at least 2 billion human beings. Isn't it a gigantic force if it is well organized? I look forward to the second Asian African Conference. I look forward to the first Asian African Latin American Conference. I look forward to the first conference of new emerging forces in Indonesia. We will organize GAME4, Games of the New Emerging Forces, CONE4, Conference of the New Emerging Forces in Indonesia, sisters and brothers. CONE4 in Indonesia, doesn't it show that Indonesia is in the forefront of the new emerging forces? Let the forces of progressive nations be united. Let the old established forces be trembling. Let the old established order be poised. This is the concept of new emerging forces proposed by Sukarno in the hottest climate of Korbo. So now, but as we know that Sukarno was overthrown, so the project of NEFOS was buried. There is no continuity of NEFOS. But now we heard about emerging countries, emerging markets, emerging economies. But these emerging countries contain two contradictory phenomena. What is called by Samir Amin, I just picked up his theory, the phenomenon of lumpen development and emergence. Lumpen development. What is lumpen development? The development, yes, there are economic growth, there are rising middle class, but also the impoverishment of the people. So at the same time, we have the rise of middle class, but also exploitation of natural resources, destruction of environment, and the impoverishment of the popular class. This is lumpen development. And emergence, what is emergence? Emergence, of course, the economic emergence, but also to have the sovereignty, economic sovereignty. Well, we spoke about domination or liberation. Our world is still marked by domination. And I quote again my teacher, Salman, that the imperialists now use 5 means of domination. What is the 5 means of domination? First, control to access to natural resources. The second, science and technology. The third, finance. Fourth, armament. And the fifth, this is the speciality of macro media. So the 5 means of domination by the imperialist or former West Bloc. So it means that if we wish to build a new world full of justice, full of well-being, no exploitation, we have to face these 5 means of domination. Now, I come to the last notion, which is global restructuring and global rebalancing. I hope Professor Mohanty will develop this. But you know that we have BRICS. Our colleagues from Brazil, Beatriz, has made a good presentation yesterday. Maybe she will come back to explain, elaborate more about BRICS. But BRICS has an ambiguity. What is, in long term, the objective of BRICS? BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, China, and South Africa. We can identify in 2 terms, global restructuring and global rebalancing. What is the objective of BRICS? It's global restructuring or global rebalancing? That's, I will leave Professor Mohanty to develop. That's for this time being. Thank you very much.
There is an alternative library that we must use, the library of Pan-Africanism of Asian scholars and leaders. We see Sukarno using this concept of emergence with another content, an alternative content based on justice among nations and reduction of imperialism. And lastly, the global restructuration and or it's an alternative global rebalancing. So thank you for this insight on the concept of Bandung spirit. Now I give the floor to Professor Fatima Harrak, who was the president of the Council for the Development of Social Science in Africa, the Khudori based in Dakar, the most important think tank in social science in Africa, in the continent. And I think she will complete this presentation and make her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Dear colleagues, it's a really great privilege for me to address this assembly in this celebrated city, in this historic hall. And I take up this opportunity to, first of all, thank the Ministry, the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs for its gracious hospitality, and to express my gratitude to the organizers and sponsors of this great event, and their head professor, Darwis Khudori, who has honored me by inviting me to this commemorative Bandung+60 conference. I am a historian from the Institute of African Studies at the University Mohammed V in Rabat, Morocco. As you said, Mr. Chairman, I did take on the presidency of Khudori, which I handed in to another colleague just last June. So I'm really, it's a precious moment for me to be here, and I treasure all the more this presence that I come from this organization, Khudori, which has just celebrated its 36th anniversary this year, I think, and which is one of the numerous institutions inspired by such a gathering is an opportunity.
Closer.
Closer, okay, closer, yes please. Such a gathering is a precious opportunity for deepening intra-South networking and dialogue, which Khudori in its various activities assumes and takes on through some programs which go beyond Africa to join the South in general. And I refer here to two major programs. One is the CEPHIS program, which has been discontinued for very recently and which we hope could be relaunched soon, which was a South-South historical research program and which profited to scholars from Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and to students and young researchers. And the other program is the South-South Tricontinental Collaborative Program, still going on in coordinations with CLACSO and the Asian equivalent for Asia. And we also have a Journal of Identity, Culture and Politics and Afro-Asian Dialogue. If I have forgotten something, Ebrima, you can add that. I take up also this opportunity to invite you, both scholars, students, to join, to engage with these programs, these already existing programs. Invite your colleagues and students also, and to help us develop these programs in the interest of Asian, African, and South American the community of scholars. Now, I am speaking here between heavyweights, as you find. I am just a poor historian trying to look ahead, if possible, but mostly trying to look back also. I think historians are made also to look back and revisit events past. So the Afro-Asian dialogue held in this city in 1955 was the high point of the Afro-Asian movement, which was itself built on the various Asian and African nationalisms that had emerged at the turn of the 20th century, and which had as their specific aim the achievement of independence for the colonies. It represented a turning point in world history, and this was underlined yesterday by many presentations. It was the first time indeed that the representatives of the former colonized nations came together and proposed alternatives to world order. So this marginalized world came to the center of history and said what it thought of the world order. It also marked the birth of what came to be called the Third World and set off an upsurge of solidarity movements among this new humanity that thus make it possible for more and more Asian and African nations to accede to independence, at least to flag independence, and equal representation at the United Nations, and to strive for development based on their national, popular, and sovereign interests. Moreover, by solemnly affirming the principle of peaceful coexistence, which has just been presented by my colleague here, the Bandung Conference set the stage for the establishment of the non-aligned movement. So this momentous 1955 conference was undoubtedly an important milestone in humanity's endeavor to establish a more just and peaceful world. But the Bandung declarations did not alter the Cold War definition of international affairs, nor did the spirit of Bandung succeed in adjusting the world economic and political order either. So there is, I think that the reassessment of Bandung is also something that should be undertaken by scholars after 60 years, and the availability of the AAC archives now is an occasion to encourage more research on our side, on the side of our students and scholars. So, the reassessment, a small stop at reassessing a little bit the Bandung Conference. The Bandung Conference was supposed to be a unified voice against colonialism, neocolonialism, and imperialism in all its forms. Was it expressed so strongly, or as strongly as we would have liked? And did it really challenge the emerging US informal empire at the time? This is one of the questions I think that still remains to be examined. The divisiveness within the Bandung 55 and the heavy presence of the US at the conference is also an inseparable element in the historical legacy of the Bandung 55. These are issues that beg to be also examined closely. The mellow and diplomatic language of the Bandung Conference, as compared, for example, to the language, the more militant language of the Tricontinental, is also an element that needs to be examined. Using why this diplomatic language, was it just because of the strong pressure from the West, from the former colonies? Of course, that's a fact also of the Bandung Conference. Or was it just the ubiquity of nationalist ideology at the time? These are issues that also could be subjects for investigations by future scholars. Using the ideology of nationalism, national interest, and the rhetoric of the consolidation of newly created nation states, nationalist leaders present in Bandung 55 saw the primary struggle at the time as one between nations, contributing thus to blurring the lines between capitalism and communism, and implicitly denying the contradictions and fundamental differences between the two systems of global power. It was only after the escalation of US military aggression in Vietnam and the succession of coup de main and coup d'etat against third world leaders perceived to be a threat to American interests that the face of the new imperialism was unveiled. That is why it has really become necessary today to strip away the myth from the reality of the spirit of Bandung. This operation is not only necessary as an exercise in historical correction, which is good in itself, but it's also important because the spirit of Bandung is being redeployed, reutilized today in various parts of the world by the in new nationalist forms, if you like, of anti-globalization politics. And we should be aware of this redeployment, the way this spirit is used and redeployed. And examples of that are numerous around us. Does this imply that the nationalist ideology has succeeded in breaking the momentum of the third world? I don't think so. A lot of work has been done, of course, on the concept of the third world, and I don't think I will stop at that. It's true that the wave of decolonization was very strong, and the newly independent countries of Africa, Asia, and South America who joined the UN did organize themselves and learn quickly to organize and to theorize within the United Nations. And soon the United Nations organization became the arena of confrontation between the have-nots, the haves and the have-nots, instead of being terrain for East and West confrontation, and that in itself is a success of the Third World Movement. To advance their interest in the non-aligned Third World constituted G77, which was also mentioned yesterday in several presentations. This group, which was able to pass a series of declarations in favor of the liberation and the development aspirations of the Third World, and which militated in favor of the establishment of UNCTAD, this agency, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, this agency of the United Nations, which remains until today one of the rare UN centers of intellectual production that is capable of confronting and sometimes even contradicting the economic arguments and recommendation of the IMF, World Bank, and WTO. So the 1970s was the era of the triumph of the Bandung era, if you like, as defined. And the high points of which was, of course, the elaboration of the new international economic order that Beatrix talked about yesterday, and of course the OPEC oil price hike, which was another high point. After which finally the big jamboree of brown, yellow, and black people of Bandung started to be taken seriously by the West. So the OPEC oil price hikes of 71 and 73 shocked the industrialized world, which reacted vehemently by rejecting en bloc the 1974 proposal for a new international economic order, in spite of its social, liberal, inspired welfarist principles. The adoption, a year later, of a more reformist document, the 1975 Charter of Economic Rights and Duties of States, which was also very reformist, was a continuation of this hardening, the West's hardening position within the United Nations. In addition to that, you have the appearance of more internal splits within the Third World, which resurfaced as the world headed for another economic recession. These, coupled with the 1980s debt crisis, provided a political space for the US to undertake a major reform of the international economic system, away from the international Keynesianism and away from the search for international economic justice. Alternative paths to development based on different mixes of market and state were slowly discredited. The ascendance of the neoliberal model of development, the so-called Washington Consensus, throughout the 1980s and well into the 1990s, finished to marginalize the third world. The market-centered approach saw development as the result of liberalizing markets and retrenching the state through privatization and deregulation. In the international economic institution, the position of the US was predominant, and with the 1980s debt crisis allowing these institutions unprecedented access to developing countries to reform their economic governance institutions and practices in line with the new thinking. And it was the decade of the incapacitating structural adjustment policies, which really sapped the third world and crushed many nations and led to the failing of many states around the world and in Africa in particular. So the North-South divide resurfaced in the late 1990s with the collapse of the 1999 WTO meetings, accelerated by the 1997-98 Asian financial crisis. The question of fairness and accountability in the international economic institutions and international decision-making became once again a central issue in global governance. It was about this time, it was about time for the third world at this juncture to start thinking really seriously of freeing itself from the quagmire of the core periphery trade structure. The enhancement of South-South cooperation looked like the best way out. Now, issues of global governance, past and present, although hastening the process of decolonization and achieving independence and economic development for the colonies constituted the backdrop to the Bandung Conference, the immediate focus at Bandung was really the problem of peaceful coexistence in this enlarged society of states. The Afro-Asian Conference devoted a lot of attention to international politics debates and focused about non-alignment, sovereignty, non-interference, peaceful coexistence, collective defense, principles of interstate engagements. So international politics was at the heart of the Bandung 55 Conference. And, but 60 years on, Bandung's initial articulations of alternative principle of international society remain silent and salient. Procedural justice remains curtailed for developing states, particularly in the key institutions of global economic governance. International economic justice has shifted from one based on the rights and duties of states, as it was the case in the 60s and 70s, to what is termed reciprocity, but which is in fact tutelage, since the 1980s, whereby developing states have to demonstrate a certain standard of good behavior in return for development assistance. Good governors are in fact, and very often, just conflated with neoliberal economic policies. A shift in the interpretation of the notion of justice from rights of the state to individual human rights, and from the sovereignty of states to universal sovereignty, and the ensuing responsibility to protect with the consequences that we know of. Moreover, contemporary global economic governance is characterized by multiple networks of authority, ranging from intergovernmental bodies, such as the World Trade Organization, to private networks, such as the credit rating agencies and transnational networks of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, civil society groups, all sorts of activists without borders, if you like, that intervene and sometimes have a higher, more weighty voice than the states themselves in decision making around the international organization. What's the impact of the emerging economies? I really appreciated your introduction of the issue of emergence, because there is a whole narrative now going on about the issue of economy, and that's really an issue that should be take the attention, attract the attention of our scholars. How did this whole notion develop, and how it is being used today for other purposes and for the other aims. So the states of the Global South were very well aware of their vulnerable position in the core periphery international trade structures inherited from the colonial period. They tried various strategies to alleviate it. Most importantly, they encouraged the formation of South-South trade linkages starting in the 1980s, which had been almost completely absent in the traditional core periphery trade relations. And there was reference yesterday to the relations, for example, between West Africa, French West Africa and France, really umbilical kind of relations which continue until today. So the trajectory of China is particularly important in this respect. China is today the largest trading nation in the world and has extensive trade relations with all the parts of the world economy. I think which would have been really unthinkable just 2 decades earlier. So during the 1980s that this dynamic has started and has given fruits. Of course, the growing weight of China in world trade and the developing world's economies is raising suspicions, particularly among Western scholars and experts. We realize also that there is a whole PR operation around this issue that is organized by the West. Yet the states of the South should remember that since the 1980s, they have steadily built up their mutual trade relations, and thanks to this trade with China, with other emerging economies, they have succeeded in breaking out of their dependence predicament. For the first time, many developing countries, or many countries over the world, have multiple partners, commercial partners, which they didn't have the chance to have. They still have to fight in order to impose that, but this is something that was just unthinkable 2 decades ago. So it is this breaking up of dependence vis-à-vis one market, vis-à-vis the markets of the North, that explains the different atmosphere in global economic governance today. And to quote Anthony Payne, the days when trade was sorted out within a rich men's club outside which so-called developing countries quietly waited for crumbs are comprehensively over. Now, how did this happen? This is also still, I'm sure there are a lot of research projects being done, but it's a topic that deserves to be investigated. Some researchers suggest that the core periphery international trade structure has been broken up because the North has lost its strategic position as the center of the world economy. But others also think that the growth, the development of South-South relations, South-South cooperations has also impacted, had impact on this. Now, how about the place of China and the emerging economies in contributing to South-South trade? For China is certainly the largest trading nation with the South. But the North is not absent from the scene either. So in Africa, for example, trade with the North is still the main the main commercial partner, in spite of the interests of the other emerging economies and other southern partners outside of emerging forces and the emerging economies. So China is not a new core. I personally don't consider it as a new core, but only first among equals in a progressively more balanced international trade structure, and hopefully that it will be more balanced even further as time goes by. Trade with China has in fact provided important alternatives for countries in the global south, both in terms of political and economic relations. It means that the stronger strategic position of the South in the international trade structure today has had a systemic influence on their terms of trade for the better. So the South interest lies in the strengthening of the South-South links, whether with China, with emerging economies, with emerging forces, but the solidarity and cooperation and the growth of partnerships and resisting the temptation of disunion is the solution, I think, for us. Of course, there are important variations within the contemporary South, and you have talked about it, and Professor Mohanty will probably develop it later further. Beatrice has talked about the BRICS. There are important variations within the contemporary South, and the Chinese research group has also talked about it quite eloquently, although we didn't have time to discuss their presentation. I hope we will do it today also. But this is only natural, since the corporate structure has dissolved. The resulting structure is bound to be something else than the corporate dichotomy that we are used to. But this does not mean, at all that the North-South dichotomy is becoming absolute. I am finishing. Is becoming absolute. The North-South dichotomy is still there. It is not becoming obsolete as some scholars would like us to believe. The contemporary South is indeed much more complicated and diverse than it was during the colonial times and during the first decades following independence. But South-South cooperation is still very important if we want to have a chance to gain the remaining battles for the reform of world governance. And I will conclude with Kwame Nkrumah's famous saying, already quoted yesterday: divided we fall, united we stand. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Professor Harrak, for this impressive presentation with substantive insights on your topic, which was global governance and the revival of the Bandung spirit. It would be difficult for me to capture all what to say, but you have recalled that Bandung was a recentering moment in the history of humanity. Actually, the president of Senegal was a poet. President Senghor said it was the most important event since the so-called European Renaissance, because it was the beginning of the shift in the equilibrium of the history of humanity. You have called for us to strip away the myth from the reality of Bandung, showing that there were certain ambiguities in 55, and history has shown that we have to be more clear in the choice between capitalism, global capitalism, and an alternative way of development based maybe on social justice, socialism. And you have showed us this is still relevant today. To understand what you said about the need for revival of the South-South linkage, you must know that international governance, for instance, in Africa is based on so-called aid dependency. based on the conditionalities of the IFIs, the Bretton Woods institution, the pressure of YTO. You must not forget that next month, I think, in Nairobi, there will be the 10th ministerial conference of WTO, WTO World Trade Organization, with this issue of the Doha agenda, the agenda of development defended by the South. So this is the structure of the international global governance. Also the insistence on elections. Elections are a way for the people to transform the reality. Is that are elections the only way and the best way for the people in the South to obtain social justice and social transformation? Well, international governance architecture is often based on election. You see countries where the state has collapsed, as in Central Republic of Africa or Mali, and quickly they demand elections. So these are issues. You have also spoken about the neglect for collective rights, social rights, rights to health, right to food, right to house in the vision of the international donors or the philosophy on which the international governance system is based today. So these are really important issues for us to think about, and I think Professor Mohanty for India will go on this trend, and I give him the floor for 20 minutes.
Thank you. Allow me to celebrate Bandung spirit by requesting everybody to say victory to Bandung after me. Jai Bandung! Jai Bandung! Jai Bandung! Jai Bandung! Jai Bandung! Next time we say Jai Jagat, which means victory to humanity, victory to the whole world. Jai Jagat! Jai Jagat! Jai Jagat! Jai Jagat! Jai Jagat! Thank you very much. I consider it as a Tirtha Yatra, a pilgrimage to Mukti Tirtha, the pilgrimage of liberation. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be present here. And among scholars and activists who have spent lifetime working for equality, liberation, equity, and happiness and prosperity of all, one and all. And therefore this is a great moment. Thank you very much to all of you for joining this, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the university in Bandung, Trisakti University, and our convener, Professor Darwis Khudori. All of you, I'm grateful to. Friends, I think we have to make a conscious attempt to add Latin America whenever we say now Asia, Africa. I think 10 years ago, when the 50th anniversary was celebrated here, that was emphasized, and consciously we have to talk about Asia, Africa, Latin America. This is my first request, and consciously we have to do that. ASAFLA, Asia, Africa, Latin America, all three. So the tricontinental is not an abstract. Tricontinental today is very real. And today Latin America is giving us leads in many experiments, both in politics and thought, in discourses. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Therefore, that will be my first suggestion for all of us. Always talk in terms of all the three, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And I'm so happy that at least a few friends and some very important activists and writers are here from Latin America. Take this be so. The other suggestion, which is becoming very clear, that we have an intellectual agenda to pursue, where, if not failure, at least the large obstacles in changing the terms of discourse have become very clear. We have tried for 60 years to make Bandung discourse to redefine political discourse, development discourse, liberation discourse, and transformation discourse, discourse in history. And we have not succeeded. Let us admit that. And the dominant discourse is still a colonial, neo-colonial, and hegemonic discourse. The post-independence period, and this is what our anti-colonial struggles were all about. They wanted to assert the right to redefine the terms of discourse, to say that liberation is about liberating from political domination, economic domination, knowledge domination. And I think that intellectual agenda is to be highlighted in this conference. And therefore, concretely, I hope when we conclude this conference, we will make some suggestions for all of us, for our governments, and particularly for the Indonesian government and the universities in Indonesia, where I think history has located the Bandung Center. And they can take the leadership, and we will all be partners in that, in promoting Bandung studies all over the world. You don't need money, you need your initiative, invitation, support. We will network, we will join these efforts and exchange scholars, exchange university professors, writers, journalists. So Bandung Studies program as an intellectual agenda has to be highlighted as a part of this conference and our future agenda. Friends, I don't know whether I'm a failed intellectual, but my generation has many, but I feel encouraged that we are all fighting. I think we are of the same age, mid-70s. There are several I can see. Bahadur, Fatima here, and many others. And in Indonesia also. For 60 years, 50 years, I taught 50 years in Delhi University. We started the Developing Countries Research Center with exactly this agenda. We wanted India, Brazil, South Africa, Asia, Africa, Latin America to engage in dialogue, to redefine history of the world, to restructure international politics studies, redefine development, produce books. One of my, you can see those people slides, state development and social movements in the third, and so on. So for 20, 30 years, we have produced books, but the dominant discourse, particularly during the last 25 years of globalization, has reasserted the hegemonic paradigm, hegemonic knowledge paradigm. So we have to try. I edit a journal. I invite all of you, to that journal, Social Change, quarterly journal from Sage. We try to promote this very dialogue. But it's one of the many, many journals. Rezasyah's 12 journals have been there for the last so many decades now. We are trying, but the intellectual agenda still stares at us, and we are a minority, but we are an optimistic minority. We know that history is on our side, and someday we will see that the Bandung studies, Bandung discourse prevails over the hegemonic discourses. Now friends, the other disappointing thing is that all the new forces which are emerging, and I'm so glad emerging forces are being redefined here, not as emerging markets. We are not peoples, we are markets. So emerging forces of liberation, emerging forces of global transformation. the women's movement, the environment movement, the human rights movement, the indigenous knowledge movement, the alternative health movement, the workers and wages movements, the forest people's rights movement, and all over the world. The MST, yesterday we had a reference to that. We have people's movements all over the world who are part of these emerging forces. Now, what is happening is all the emerging resources are being reappropriated by hegemonic forces. Similarly, all the emerging transnational organizations, interstate organizations, regional associations are also being pushed to become what the World Bank calls responsible stakeholders. This is the discourse. China is given, China has been still changing this, the world situation. I agree with Fatima. But it is also attracted to be part of the high table. So is India. So is India. That is why let us very closely watch this dichotomy, these contradictory trends in the role of the new forces, in the role of BRICS. This is what came up yesterday in the discussion. And so there are two processes. They talk about global rebalancing, the shift of global power from Europe and US to East Asia, China. They have stopped talking about Japan now, but it is really China, Japan, Korea, that East Asia. And now India has, this year India has higher GDP growth rate than China. What does it mean? I mean, we all have so many problems of poverty, environmental degradation, and so on. So the India, China, Brazil, South Africa, Russia, BRICS, plus Argentina, Indonesia, Turkey, these are the high-table aspirants. So it has been said that now there is a global rebalancing taking place. The rebalancing discourse is to be understood very clearly that it is to make minor adjustments in the Bretton Woods system, to have IMF still as the main, and with all its unequal voting powers and so on. Even WTO, which technically has one country, one vote, is manipulated to have exactly the same kind of negotiations. That is why the Doha round has taken so long, and it is still not succeeding because of the Western powers' emphasis on their right to have subsidized agriculture and certain monopoly over intellectual property rights and so on. Now, therefore, rebalancing means existing power structure and new power holders being part of the decision-making process, either as equal partners, but more perhaps as junior partners, because China may become number one GDP in 2040, surpassing US. India will surpass US in 2050, according to the Goldman Sachs prediction. But US military power will still be high, so GDP may be different. And so China and India are now trying to bridge the military gap with US. Is that the world we want? Is that the world that Bandung aspired for humanity? No. We wanted a restructuration of power relationships, a restructuration of institutions which are now monopolistic, the 5 dominations that Samiraman talks about. We want a restructuring of all those relations, economic, political, military, cultural, and communication. The communication monopoly today, the internet monopoly, the communication monopoly today is equally serious. So we have to understand the meaning of global restructuring. Our anti-colonial struggles were about restructuring, was about global transformation in a fundamental way. Restructuring is a multi-layered restructuring, global, continental, national, and regional and local, and they're all interconnected. And that is why I talked about the global Swaraj yesterday. Now, why is it important today to talk about it and emphasize? And there is an opportunity, in my view, for the Bandung discourse and the march of the Bandung spirit. The opportunity arises from three major crises which have turned capitalist globalization and the capitalist epoch as unsustainable. They have become crisis-ridden. And those three problems are increasing violence, increasing dependence on security apparatus everywhere, and violence and counter-violence everywhere. And this is why terrorism is a day-to-day experience. So is counter-terrorism. And you have a whole discourse going on in the global rebalancing framework, in the existing military dominance framework, to have a counter-terrorist approach. And the same security kind of mentality is transmitted in the nation states to tackle their local resistance movements, whether it is political or cultural or ethnic and so on. Instead of demanding, instead of conceding that there are demands for recognition, demands for self-determination, demands for genuine people's rights. So increasing violence has made this model unsustainable. Increasing inequalities, some old, some new. The old inequalities are income inequalities, class inequalities. I mean, China was one of the most egalitarian societies till the 80s. Today it is one of the most egalitarian, unequal societies in the world, competing with US in Gini coefficient, 49-50. You see, India is also highly unequal. So is Indonesia. So inequality, income inequality, class inequality. Now, women's movement has prospered all over the world. But what has neoliberal economic development done to women? And we have a whole session on that. It has created new sources of gender domination. And despite the fact that we have now more consciousness about women's rights, regional disparities have increased tremendously in China, India, and across the globe. The neoliberal market economy in the global scale has created inequalities in a big way. Inequalities are not acceptable anymore in the age of creative self, in the age of self-determination, in the age of people's rights, where every group, every individual, every region has realized through study of history, study of anti-colonial struggle and education, the human right to dignity. Inequality is unacceptable. Therefore, right to equality of cultures, regions, religions. You see, some of these military dominations and military classes have been posed as class of civilization, meaning really class of religions, which has really perverted historical understanding. No civilization is monolithic. All civilizations have multiple traits, and all parts of the world have civilization. A Bandung discourse on civilization, which was indicated in the Bandung Declaration in 1955, and again this year, we have to understand that humanity everywhere has contributed to civilization. So there has to be respect for equal status and respect for all civilizations. The third is the most equally strong, unsustainable development, namely climate change, resource depletion, and environmental degradation. And everywhere people are aware of this, and this is the gift of capitalist industrial revolution of the last 200 years. Something that defined our nation building, whether it is Nehru, Sukarno, Nasser, all of them, they wanted to build modern nations, and they adopted that. Now we know that today, if they were alive, they would be very, very active on the forefront of struggle for climate justice, against climate change, against environmental degradation caused by this kind of development. Therefore, we have to affirm three very important values derived from the Bandung spirit. Affirm sovereignty, right to self-governance of all nations, all regions, and all peoples. Affirm equality of all cultures, religions, and regions and states. Affirm local people's right to protect resources and plan their own sustainable future. I call it the right to earth, right to material and cultural resources of your area and share it with the rest of the world on mutually agreeable terms. This is the Ubuntu concept. Swaraj and Ubuntu together define the concept of right to earth. So, we have to have, therefore, strategies of resistance. Resist military domination, resist techno-economic domination, or techno-capitalist domination, and that domination has its collaborators in our own country, around us. We have to be careful about them, and resist cultural domination. Equally important. This is why the intellectual agenda is so important. But resist cultural domination doesn't mean some ethno-chauvinistic or cultural chauvinism. All cultures have positive and negative traditions. All civilizations have positive and negative elements. And all civilizations are dynamic, and through struggle they are changing and they are evolving. And therefore, that dynamic, dialectical concept of culture has to inform us in the 21st century. Therefore, friends, today the Bandung spirit has made us hopeful because the last 300 years, cosmology, not only the development strategy, the fundamental philosophical premises governing this development, this, the colonial political economy, that is under challenge. The notion of good life is not high energy, high consumption, high rise, high speed, good life. It is good life that is sustainable, that is materially adequate, but also culturally fulfilling, that gives me the right to participate in defining that, in politically shaping the path of development. What is the approach to nature in this cosmology? Not the conquest of nature, which enlightenment, gave us the confidence that human beings can now conquer nature. No, it is exploration of nature so that we live in the harmony of nature and species to the mutual benefit of each other. Similarly, the notion of science, not positivist determinist science, it is dialectical, evolving science. A scientist must be most humble to admit what he or she does not know, even though we organize our life on what we know. Still, we should have the humility and acceptance of these limits to knowledge. So that is the approach to science, the dialectical and historical approach to science. So alternative cosmology is said about the notion of truth and so many other philosophical premises. Therefore, friends, the Bandung cosmology, the Bandung paradigm of development, the Bandung path of human progress, the Bandung perspective on human history, that is the agenda for our conference. Jai Bandung. Thank you.
We have heard another wise and militant voice about the Copernican revolution, basing the international governance on peoples. In my country, we say the translation of Jay Jakat Nala Masa, which means if you remain lying on your bed, you are dead. So you must get up, stand up, fight for your rights. We have heard that. We have heard also the Ubuntu, the call to Ubuntu, the respect for nature, for women, for nature. Also important for the declaration, our need to connect with Latin America. We talked together with Aziz about that during the stop on the trip from Jakarta to Bandung. And I think that is obvious. We have to link and connect to South America. Also the intellectual sovereignty, the representative of the Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs talked about the network of think tanks. But the issue, the challenge is what is the content of these think tanks? Because certain think tanks in the South just reflect as their colleagues in the North. So Professor Mohanty calls for an alternative ways of thinking, an intellectual insurrection, if I may say. Very important also, the redefinition of images. Often you hear, for instance, people saying Africa is now the new frontier. France say Africa is the future of France. But what do they mean? Do they mean the same thing as what the African youth or the youth and the poor people in the South are waiting? And we must also know that there are many poor people in the North. Today with unemployment, and so our struggle is also linked to the struggle of poor people in the North. So these are some of the important ideas brought by Professor Mohanty that we will take it into account in the declaration. Now, I will talk to Teuku Rezasyah from Indonesia, who is going to talk about the role of Indonesia in revitalizing the Bandung spirit. And after that, we will have maybe 45 minutes of discussion.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, good day. Peace be upon you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It is an honor to be here. We in Bandung call this city the capital city of Asia, Africa. And sitting here in front of you has been producing a lot of tremble. Firstly, behind me, flags of our countries. And next to me, I can sense the aura of optimism from the chairman and also from the speakers, especially the last word, Jaya Bandung. Could we say it again? Jaya Bandung. Jaya Bandung. Means Bandung is great, isn't it, Professor? Well, the topic I would like to propose is based on the research done by our institution at Universitas Pajajaran. This university was established soon after the Bandung Spirit. Our campus was built in 1957, Professor, and also most universities inside Indonesia were established soon after the Bandung Spirit. And I would like to produce the outline of this topic today, consisting of the introduction. Secondly, the urgency of revitalization of the Bandung Spirit. Thirdly, the real actions. Then the role of Indonesia, and finally the conclusion. When it comes to history, we are aware, 1955. 5 of my right fingers, and the 5 of my left fingers. With 5 fingers over here and 5 fingers over there, a lot of things you can do, sir. Boxing, cooperation. I think in this era of the 21st century, it is time for us to work together. Not only among us, but with other countries outside the Asia, Africa, and Latin America. To be aware, if we ask our fellow Indonesians, what do you think of 1955? They know the Bandung Conference. But they also know there are dozens of countries gained independence after the year 1955. Because of Asia, Africa? Yes. Because of the spirit of Asia, Africa? Because the trust we had among ourselves. But what happened then? Say all. There is a big question. Our level of cooperations are not sufficient. at both the bilateral levels, at the regional levels, and also at the United Nations levels. We have problems of substances, we have problems of speed, so that we have not achieved what our great fathers had designed in 1955. Among others, we are still working very hard to achieve the ideals stipulated in the new Asia-Africa Strategic Partnership. Can we go to the next slide, please? And then, in our institution called the Asia-Africa Research Center, we have clearly examined what are our main problems. And for this, we did our internal research inside Indonesia, and we also traveled to several countries inside the Asia and African countries. I hope the experience of my university can be shared to us on what is the problems. To be honest, there is insufficient discussion and discourse in the Asian and African society at the society level. To be honest, the idea of Asia-Africa remains exclusive for the decision makers, in this case, the legislative and the executive branch of the government. People are still considering we have not been sufficiently involved. That's number one. The number two, the Asian African topics itself, when we go to the primary educations, we have not had sufficient curriculum. Where when we talk about the curriculum, we mention only the top leaders at that time, the national anthems, the former colonialists of the Asian African countries, the political parties of the previous leaders and the ruling political parties today, and the sources of economy. So in this case, when we talk about Asian Africa, we are talking about the statistics. We hardly touch the energy. We hardly talk about the soul of the country and the promises given by the great fathers of the nations. And then we also check at the university level. There is a feeling of unconfidence because considering the fact that there are always conflicts in the African region. Leaders over there, they experience lack of commitment for peaceful coexistence. And then at the same time, it is very difficult to garner sufficient support from the brothers and sisters in Asia for the development of their brothers and sisters in Africa. And it is also the fact that there is a concern that our brothers and sisters are still relying on outside forces. To be honest, for us in Indonesia, if I check the students, we find that when we talk about Asia-Africa cooperation, we are still far compared to Asia-Pacific cooperation, European Union cooperation, and also the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Then we tried to consult our business people. As we know, business is the engine for growth. The role of the businessman is great actually in this world. But when we ask the question for the closer Asia-Africa partnership, the answer is quite pessimistic. They find that the African is not a good market for Indonesia compared to the markets in the USA, the European Union, China, and Japan. The last countries are more profitable for us, and not to consider the excellent infrastructure, the stable political system, and the existence of direct flight. And to be honest, to deal with African countries, the problem of direct flight, there are problem of currency. And then when we check again our Indonesian businessmen, how could we do business better with our brothers and sisters in Africa? The answer is less pessimistic, less optimistic. Well, we have been experiencing less business contacts, no business associations, no translations of the rules into English, French, Arabic, and also English itself. So the answer is not so optimistic in my side. So based on this finding, allow me to move to the next slide. The title is The Urgency of Revitalization of the Bandung Spirit. In this case, there is a need for greater awareness among society in Indonesia and also in our countries, involving the society, the businessmen, the academicians on Asian African issues and the need for closer cooperations. In this case, we need to involve multiple actors at the same time. It is about time, after 60 years of cooperation, we need to fly higher. Actors in international relations should not be only G2G, but to be broadened into B2B, business to business, then also B2B, people to people, U to U, university to university, C to C, cities to cities, B to B, people, provinces to provinces. I think we need to move faster to generate positive results from the involvement of multiple actors at the same time. And then, what kind of other awareness we need to develop? We need to immediately transform the nationalistic language of Bandung Conference in 1955 to the 21st century language. If in the past the issue was the East against the West, today, how could we engage the West? And at the same time, how to utilize the cooperations between the North, between the South, within the South, and to consider the livelihood of 2 billion people at the same time. Because when countries in Asia developing, they hardly mention that they are part of the 2 billion people of the Asian African nations. And then we could also revitalize the Bandung spirit by overcoming the basic problems in implementing the MKAA itself. To be honest, my fellow scholars have mentioned there remain center-periphery in the current relationship. So there is need to change from center to periphery into a new kind of center inside the periphery itself. Well, in this case, when it comes to the Asian African countries, we are the centers. We are the centers. And then what are the problems? There are needs to reduce the economic gaps. We have been using the terms called MDG. It is about time to re-examine. Are the MDGs indicators remain sufficient for today's development? And then the third way is to make the Bandung spirit as the guiding principles in tightening the solidarity of the people of Asia, Africa. Let us better understand the meaning of peaceful coexistence. Because the meaning of peaceful coexistence hardly heard when we talk about Asia. And then we hardly see how one country share its best practices when it comes to the national development. And then when we talk about Palestine, we hardly hear the word Palestine when foreign ministers or presidents produce their speeches. Let me share with you the Indonesian experience, in this case my Universitas Pajajaran. We have been putting forward the idea of establishing the Asian African Center. This is the first in Indonesia, and we sincerely hope that we would work closely with other centers inside Indonesia, and then also with the state departments, with ministries who have Asian African components in their work. And then based on this experience, we are looking forward to develop something called Asia-Africa relations beyond economic and political relations by involving wider social elements. In this case, we believe that we cannot consider university as the lighthouse, but we need to engage other actors inside Indonesia, let's say academicians, students, and think tanks. And then let me move to the next slide. Steps in revitalizing Bandung spirit. There are 5-6 ideas I think we could work together. Firstly, encouraging connectivity amongst Asian, African at the grassroots levels. We in Indonesia have been practicing ASEAN. ASEAN is quite active. ASEAN has moved further into the ASEAN 2025 and also the ASEAN Economic Community. So this research center, I hope, is expected to share its fruits of experience to our fellow Asian African countries. And then what we could do next is organizing exhibition on trade and culture. So we in Indonesia have been working hard not only to celebrate your national days, but also working hard to produce greater business-to-business contacts. And then to institutionalize the center with other centers inside Indonesia, inside ASEAN. And then we think, and when it comes to a broader level, we need to build strong network and funding. Because when it comes to funding, we hardly find we are enough. So it is time for governments and companies inside the Asian and African countries to share CSR. And then when we talk about government-to-government coordination, at number 5, we need to think more not just on the MDG agendas, but how best to fulfill the post-MDG agendas vis-a-vis our own natural resources and the alternative technologies. And then we should also further focusing research on major issues in Asia, Africa. So I think this is one of the ideas we could propose. We need to talk, for example, fulfilling the basic needs for national development. Indonesia had experience with the zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality. Why can't we embark higher into zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality in Asian, African, and Latin American region? Now let me move to the conclusion. I think Indonesia is gaining experience now. I think we are looking forward to work harder with our colleagues in the Asian African region. And then, in this case, we would like to move further, namely in initiating and leading all steps. We have been considering this. We are thinking on furthering the idea not only into the Asian African Center, but we need to establish academic forums and also the network of Asian African think tanks. And today's meeting is the initial step. And then we hope that our think tanks can not only produce papers, but can produce working papers and to link with the epistemic community as well, and becoming the policy guidelines and curriculum for the governments in the Asian, African, and Latin America. And then it is necessary for the items number 5 to build the winning idea. To build the winning idea of the new Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And for this case, I owe my supervisor. There is a need to produce a tagline in all our communication. So the diplomatic tagline of the governments in Asia and Africa and Latin America is Asafla. So today we mentioned Jaya Bandung. Let me end with Jaya Asafla. Jaya Asafla. Thank you very much.
Yes, capture Rezasyah, I think it's always important to go from the vision to the implementation. And Professor Rezasyah has advocated a shift of pedagogy, more centered on people, on business, on decentralization maybe, not just to stay at an elitist level, high level, but to bring the Bandung spirit in the schools, and so in the language of international law in the South. Bandung spirit must be quoted as an international covenant or reference, just as other UN Charter, etc., etc. So I will not take more time. I'll open the floor to the public. I know on the face, but the name is...
The mic should be there. Mohanty. Yeah.
What is happening in the center? The young people. What is... You are not alive. On my right, not a political news. Okay, it's good for the beginning, just 5 or 6 and then. Okay, I've noted 6 people. You can begin, start with that. Can you present yourself?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Ki-Zerbo, a professor from Tribhuvan University of Nepal. I would like to begin my comment with Darwis story. And this comment applies also to other commentators. Professor Darwis, you will explain the meaning of Bandung spirit, define the Bandung spirit, and also you talk about the causes or means of domination. Fine, that's very good. But what I found lacking in the discussion, in the speaker's presentation, that why Bandung spirit is on the decline. What has been the root cause behind the decline of the Bandung spirit? For example, there are several examples. Let me give you an example. In 2014, non-aligned women's ministerial level meeting was held in Algeria. But that news was not covered, and almost all the media, worldwide media, they just ignored that news was ignored. The NAM's ministerial level meeting in Algeria was ignored. And the same countries, those same countries who were parts of Bandung, who enthusiastically participated in the Bandung conference, same countries are now in conflict with the member countries, with NAM countries, with their own partners, with their neighbors. Whether it is in South Asia, East Asia, in Middle East, this is the truth. Because that they are in conflict, and sometimes they themselves have intervened in their neighboring countries, sometimes militarily, sometimes without military. And these days, it is not necessary that the colonialism or colonialism comes in military uniform. It comes in different forms, and it has been continuing. Is continuing. But my point is here that what have we done to checkmate, to control, to checkmate this trend? For example, no speakers raised the question, for example, this whole organization like UN, that what has it been doing? UN was supposed to prevent war after Second War. It was one of the objectives. But what happened in 1991? The first time in the history of humanity that in the name of UN the war was imposed. Was imposed on Iraq. It was in the name of UN. That time, no name countries, no the big country, they say absolute burning spirit. The country who burning spirit, they didn't raise the voice to that level. Of course, there were some voices from like Malaysia, from Martin Muhammad, he spoke, and Teuku spoke from Venezuela, like that. And this Yugoslavia, he would visit the Baghdad despite being threatened by the biggest military power in the world. He visited the other countries, even what happened. Even NAM countries, some of the NAM countries who participated in the Bandung government, they also were the past the alliance against the war of Iraq. Indirectly or directly, they helped in the war against the destruction of Iraq.
It's slowly and maybe considerably.
Oh yeah. So what I mean, why this is happening? My point is here that economic interest has overtaken other interests. For example, even China, China itself is the victim of colonization. China also in the UN, in the Security Council, did not use its veto force just to and remained absent. That's why in the name of UN the war was imposed. Why China also remained absent and why? Because they were afraid of what hurting their economic interests. Now economic interests have taken over other interests. So in the past, there were ideologies, there were first ideas first, now economic interest. So this is the fact. And how to curtail. So, and then we have thought about, we have any plan, how you thought about this, and why don't we go into those causes also. Only then we come out with some suggestions and some strong message. Just by the narrative, we would not be sufficient. That will not solve the problem. We have to go into depth and find out the problem.
Thank you.
Well, I have to say I'm Tony Muizigwe from Institute of African Studies, University of Nigeria, Soka. I would like to say that I passionately share my brother's passion speech. I agree with you very strongly. Well, I'm happy to be here, and of course, I would not like to regret what happened in 1955 when Black Africa was underrepresented. But during that time, we had no strong voice. Only NASA spoke for Africa, but there was no strong Black African voice. And possibly that may have been the problem of Indonesia's lukewarm diplomatic attitude towards Black Africa of this point. Because if improvement were to be here and on a strong force, possibly Sukarno should be more magnetic to Black Africa than he was. But then I have a question for the chairman and the four panelists. Professor Rezasyah gave us a good theoretical policy framework, which are very, very deepening and demanding. And I thank you for that. But for the others, let me ask this, well, it's just in form of question. In this era of emerging forces, rebalancing and restructuring, what are the rules of Black Africa? Some people will prefer me to remove Black Africa and say Sub-Saharan Africa, but black is still black. I am black. So, in the context of the Bandung spirit, putting into cognizance or with reference to first, eradication of neo-colonialism. What has China, India, what role have they played in eradicating the present state of neo-colonialism, especially on the economic plane? Last September, I was with Darwis and yes, and the chairman, University of Ghana, Legon, and we talked about the new axis of scholarship in Asia-Africa relations. And it was China, China, China. And yet, I raised an objection of what you know about the low voice there, because I said, look, we are talking of Southside cooperation, and we are seeing China, and I asked the Chinese questions. How are we sure that you are coming to Africa is not one way of replacing or contesting with the North, with the West on the appropriation of our resources and reimposing a new form of neo-colonialism? China, Africa, not China-Nigeria relation meeting conference, China, Africa. That the whole Africa meeting with China. And recently, I know Modi is having conference with India, Africa. In other words, India sees the whole Africa as a unit. China sees the whole Africa as a unit. And seeing them as a unit, and when you interpret it deeply, you find that they already see Black Africa as a citadel of neo-colonialism. So how do we divest that interest of subcontinentalism being transformed into a new force of neo-colonialism? That is one. Secondly, yeah, I hope I'm going on. Yeah, we're also talking of social justice. Yes, in the name of, yes, we thought that when you look at the Anti-Syria, you found that the 5 principles of Indonesia, they are good models for most Black Africa. How have we operated it? Social justice. How is social justice carried out in China? How is it carried out in India? How are they trying the economic forces transporting the same form of social justice to continental Africa? Because it's not a question of emphasizing on economic cooperation, economic transformation. They have to go with the emerging social forces. So how do we marry them? Again, reduction of poverty. I was talking to the Chinese in China. Said, the Chinese called me and said, gentlemen, I share your passions. But do you know in China, we also have very poor people. In India, we have very poor people. So when you are talking of big forces, big China, a big economy, how will they transform the big economy to the reduction of poverty? How will India also do this? Because the state of poverty in India, the state of poverty in China, with all their massive international wealth, could also be a discouraging factor to Black Africa in adopting them as a model. So we must see how we get it. And again, we are talking about security.
Can you?
Yeah, I'm summarizing.
Because we have 4 people.
Yeah.
We have time, but after we are running out of time.
Yeah, I'm taking it from you. Please, let me conclude. This is not 1955, so Africa must have their voice this time. Then we're talking of security. How we operated in security. We have many religious crises. The case of Libya, the dead workers, the emerging forces were there. The West invaded, removed Gaddafi. We have the situation in Central African Republic. The other countries were there. The West has to intervene. In Cote d'Ivoire, the West intervened. So how are we trying to protect ourselves in the spirit of background? So we have to look into it. In Nigeria, Boko Haram, we also waiting for American intervention. We wait in Africa waiting for America to intervene now, to bring us out. So you see there is a problem. And finally, we talk of religious tolerance. Well, I'm not trying to be so unpatriotic to my nation, but I came to Indonesia. Indonesia is by statistics, so far the largest Islamic country. But you come here, you find that Islam is not taken as a religious face of the people. The people interact freely, and there's little indices of religious conflict as is obtained in other areas. So how do we sell it to other areas like Nigeria, like Africa, like Kenya, like Somalia, where we have religious crisis, so that the spirit of Bandung will permeate in practical reality and not just ending on a think tank brainstorming conferences. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we return the floor to Sima, please. please 2 minutes maximum, because unless we are here till 11.
Thanks. At the outset, I would just like to say that I enjoyed this session. It was full of energy and it was so much of learning. But my question refers to Lazare's quoted high-weighted historians who want to make a change for tomorrow and who are ready to accept tools and technologies and change methodologies. On one hand, and also it is addressed to those, the ones who recognize that climate change and environment disasters and all those are also going to bring change in tomorrow. It's something which is so nearby. My question is of contradiction. The contradiction, in a sense, whenever we refer it out here, also when Darwis referred, or even Professor Mohanty referred, we talked about strategy of resistance the moment we talk of science and technology. We talk of abuse, misuse, overuse, and all those things the moment we think of science and technology. And even when one was talking about, and when we think of domination or something, we again refer to environment, we again refer to science and technology, we use the word domination. My question is, in today's time, when remote sensing and all those things is a reality, when we are getting data of 0.6 meter resolution, when QuickBird, Cartosat, ResourceSat, all those satellites are giving us data of that high resolution, at every regular interval, say after a few days, even every day we are getting new data which are touching our spatial base, and we also want a space which is happy, where people are resilient and all that. And when we, in case if we have agreed upon one thing, that we are ready to change our tools and technologies, my question is, that are we ready to shift in the interpretation of timeline in defining contemporary history? Today, when changes are taking place at a different pace, when changes are taking place in such a this thing, why can't we think of these tools of science and technology as co-partners? Why can't we only think of them in something in a very negative tone? Because all those strategies and all those structures which we talk about, whenever we talk about, we think of again divisive policies. Tsunami happened few hours before, then it touched India. So many people lost their life. It's only because India had not signed MOU with American GPS. That's how the beginning of Gagan was there. That's how GLONASS began. That's how all those others. Today, the moment we think of GPS, we think GPS is the one which is a navigation system. It is not. GPS is just one company that is giving us GPS, or one country is giving us. So we have to develop, we have to think of science and technologies as equal partners, especially in today's time when we are getting so much of information from them. And plus, thinking of the timeline, climate change is changing the timeline interpretation in terms of new histories. Let's do that. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's start. I'm Mr. Mohanty. I don't know whom to ask the question. Maybe anybody can take it. One of the leaders of Bandung conference, named China, again, I come back to China, it's offering you perhaps an alternative, one way, one road. It's, very kind of partnership. So would the proponent of Bandung spirit take that, that offer as an alternative to Bandung spirit? Will it deliver? So, and they claim that it's a world. So will the Bandung spirit people take it up, that offer? Thank you.
My name is Salman from the Center for Industry and Small Medium Enterprises, Teuku University, that will be hosting this seminar in the next Friday and Saturday. Let me go to my colleagues from University of Manoranjan. The problem you mentioned here are very clear, are very obvious, and so let me propose two things to make more value added from this meeting to follow up. what we can do concretely, especially in the short run. First, among academicians from the participants, I think within these 2 days we can try to make not official MOU, but maybe memorandum of intent. How can we do in the short run activities together, like writing a paper for the working paper in your department, or writing together papers that can be published if you have journals in your universities. That can short run activities is very easy, very cheap, but at least concrete. And the second, my post is that, I think embassies of African countries in Asia as well as Asian embassies in Africa are the forerunner, the key player in promoting, because here you say to build the awareness, and I think the awareness can be done. To build the awareness can be done, for instance, by organizing cultural entertainment even by the embassies in the host countries. Because I'm in Indonesia, I never heard African embassies in Jakarta organize cultural event that inviting us to see their culture. So I think in the next step, do that, including from our side from Asia in African countries. And also to provide information about trade, economic potential challenges in the host country to businessmen in Asia or vice versa in Africa. So that I think embassies have a very, very important role to play.
Thank you, Professor Toulouse. Now, no.
Thank you very much. I will start by my final proposal after this very interesting panel, which is maybe to publish and write together a small booklet, which is like a dictionary, or a small, very small, with the terms, the terminology of the Bandung spirit, and how it was appropriated, and as our friend from India said, manipulated, in the sense that words like global governance are used now by North, by the United Nations establishment, so that there is no real distinction. How terms have been changed and manipulated over time. Because some of the statements of one thinks could be a lecture given at the United Nations. But what I was the practical consequences of such terminology, because every time the South produces a new term, you find it manipulated, reappropriated. I think we should work as a group and on terms, terminology, philosophical terminology, under the leadership of our two scholars from Indonesia and India and your University of Bandung, and make this like the statements of Bandung, the Panchila, whatever, a worldwide dictionary for people to use terms. This is the final conclusion. Other things I want to say in terms of the Arab world. I made a study about how Bandung was killed in Egypt. And I don't think everybody realized what happened. I found that one of the main thinkers around Nasser said in 1959, which is Harrak, he's a great, Bandung is dead. He says, I quote him, Bandung was a step. Souvenirs in 1959, incidents that were dear to us, but we have turned the page. In 1959, we are Asians in Palestine, Iraq, Syria, North and other Arabs are North African, but we have completely forgotten the spirit of Afro-Asian unity. Something happened, I think, which Mr. Aribay said, if we only look at the North, We look at China, we look at the United States, we look at the United Nations, but we are not looking to the real spirit of Asian philosophy and African Buddhism or Swaraj, whatever. And I think this is a great occasion for us to relaunch this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the one who said Bandung is dead, maybe I think it's not right. We are here. Now I want to give the floor to Okay, please very short and quick because we have 5 minutes for the panelists.
Thank you. My query goes to Darwis Khudori. In your paper presentation, you talked of this global restructuring, right? In terms of saying global restructuring, my query is that, is it a dream or reality? In reality, can it be attained? Because when we look over the different international organizations, like in Asia, the recently established, organized like BIMSTEC in Asia, right? The old South Asian country organization. And in our subcontinent, that is the SARC countries, you see 7, now 8 countries, including Afghanistan to Maldives, these within the underdeveloped countries. Then the newly emerged organization that is the BRICS, as yesterday, today, it has been interpreted, BRICS. Now, all these organizations, and the other thing is, even in Asia, before BRICS was established, the Shanghai organization. The Shanghai organization was established within the objective of, immediately after the disintegration of Russia, former USSR, right? And especially in fear of the, different like ISI, yes, now at the present, in Africa, the Boko Haram, right? Such kind of, against to be cautious, to be aware of such, to be safe from the national good, from the national aspect. Both Russia and China, they organized and they agreed to establish the SARC, Shanghai organization. So with this different, in the international level, different organizations, how are you going to attain the global restructuring in what way? So my query is that, is it a dream or can it be attainable in future? This is my query. And the other thing is, I also have a question with Manoranjan, Mohanty, because we are the neighboring countries, right? And you talk of the, the hegemony of, hegemony that is, in your talk, colonial hegemony. How about the emerging countries like India, China? Recently, in our country, we have border disputes, etc. And India is a growing market, international, in the country, like China. Both have their market-seeking objectives. But a small country like Nepal, you see, then how is the other SARC affiliation with BIMSTEC, right? India is also a member of the BIMSTEC. India is also a member of the objective observation status with the Shanghai organization. So, is it not aspiring to be the hegemony of colonial, just like the colonial hegemony? There is an Indian hegemony with the neighboring country. Can it not be said? So how is your opinion as a professor of history and a neighboring country? My question goes to you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't think we'll answer all the questions, and maybe we, as a platform, has the capacity to solve all the problems certain dating from centuries, but I will give the floor to everybody, 1 minute and 30 seconds to try to say a word, and the debate will continue. I think the panel this afternoon is also always also in the same concerns the same topic. We have the drafting of the declaration where we can make inputs, so the process is continued. So we'll start with Darwis.
Yeah, very quick, and I try to select which question covers others. So maybe the first question from Senegal Tan, that why the Bandung spirit is finished or died. I mean, and it is related also to the question of Noha. I think you made an allusion to Haikal, who said that Bandung is dead. Hassan and Haikal, the Egyptian journalist. Yeah. I think there are two reasons. Well, what is called Bandung era. I mean, Bandung era is, in my mind, 1955-1970, or maybe shorter, 1955-1965. This is the Bandung era. Why Bandung era was ended in this period, in 1965 or 1970? Two reasons, of course, internal and external. The external, of course, is all the effort of the West Bloc to retake the control over these former colonized countries by many measures, many actions, including inciting the subversions inside the countries. In Indonesia, we have experiences, of course, the rebels inside Indonesia, which is supported by the United States, for example. This is from external, just one example. From internally, there are also divisions. One of the most important, I think, that Bandung era, the development during this Bandung era, there is a lack of bottom-up. All the development policy during the Bandung era was top-down. Although the leaders are legitimate, but there is a lack of bottom-up, of democracy. I mean, all the decision is coming from the top to the below. The democracy has not yet developed, and the aspiration of the people is not taken. The leaders are legitimate because they are the struggles for the independence, but there is a lack of involvement, of participation of the mass into this process of development. And also the division among the South countries, non-alignment. There are three: the radicalists like Indonesia, Egypt, and the neutralists, and then the West oriented. So this makes that finally Bandung era ended around 1970. Thank you.
I didn't say finish, I say on the decline, so it's just for correction.
Okay, just on this issue of the Bandung, I think the world has changed in front of us. Of course, Bandung was during the Cold War, and a lot of water has run under the bridges since then. Cold War, nationalism, these have played their role, and the contribution, I think, of the Bandung spirit to the putting of the struggle of the haves and the have-nots against the haves in the United Nations is a big victory in that era. There is also, I think we should also admit that our leaders and the intellectuals also have not done their job of maintaining that spirit alive through the various means that we have talked about. I would also touch just one issue about our attitude vis-à-vis these emerging economies, some of which are being presented as possible replacements for colonial powers or for the hegemons. I think what we have gone through this long era of dependence of our former colonizer, of his strong links with our former colonizer. I think now that we are just learning how to diversify our relations, we should just keep in mind, not ask China or India or the other, how can we make sure that you are not going to become hegemon? We should be ourselves, sure of ourselves, and make sure that they do not become hegemons. I mean, the power is up to us to take our destinies between our hands and not wait for the hegemons to impose their programs on us.
For preventing hegemony.
Exactly.
Let's clap at that.
Thank you. I think I will add to what Fatima just said about hegemony. I strongly condemn Indian hegemonic steps which are sometimes visible, including the recent stopping of the trucks and the supply of essential goods to Nepal. I was one of the signatories of a mass signature campaign condemning this and urging Indian government to open the supply lines. And fortunately, some of these pressures have worked, and now slowly the supply lines have opened. Therefore, as she said, we have to be very alert and continue our struggles, even against our own governments, so that hegemonic trends are resisted. The SAARC, SCO, and all these organizations have the potential to become part of the rebalancing process, or if we pressurize them hard enough, we can gain something in the direction of restructuring process. Right now, SAARC, even ASEAN, they are part of the rebalancing process. In other words, within the existing global economic order, they are actors. The one country, one belt, one road proposal, the two Silk Roads proposal of China, can go either way. But the formal assurances that the Chinese government has given tell us that there can be an element in democratizing the hegemonic process. Therefore, we have to pressurize China, all the countries which are, particularly Indonesia, whose maritime fulcrum policy is going to be either connected with the US policy or with the Chinese new maritime Silk Road policy, has a role here, how to ensure that it becomes a democratizing process of the oceanic routes. Similarly, the science and technology policy, SIMA, has, as I said, enabled us to use what we know, but also to know that we don't know everything about weather still. GIS system is still an imperfect system. All GIS scientists would admit that. But what we know, we have to use that with the skill that we have. Finally, African studies. I would like to turn it around, and I would like to say that continental studies, Asian studies, European studies, South American studies, African studies should be now used to unify a regional study program. But I agree with you that the colonial pedagogy boxed us, Middle East, Africa, like that. We have to take countries seriously. Therefore, the pedagogical challenge, the intellectual challenge is at the root.
Thank you, moderator. I think when it comes to the Bandung spirit, it remains relevant. But what are the problems we have today? Today, we do not have charismatic leaders. This is what I find. We need another Sukarno, we need another Nehru, we need another Nasser. But unluckily, they had ultra-nationalist principles and were not appreciated by the North. So in this case, we need to produce new Sukarno, new Nehru, new Nasser. How to do that? I recall my great father, President Sukarno. He said once, give me one student, we will upside down. Give me one student, I will upside down the mountain. Then give me 1,000 students, we will upside down the world. That's the statement of Sukarno. Meaning, students today are leaders tomorrow. How to unite us? Let's produce new generation of students to become our next leaders. Let's establish the Asafla Leadership Institute. This is the immediate challenge. Let's produce the Asafla Leadership Institute. The curriculum coming from Asafla experiences. Teachers coming from Asafla countries. Recommendations for Asafla people. Language using Asafla vocabularies. Jaya Asafla. And then there is a good question. What is the role of the Black Africa? We of the Black Africa, isn't it? Yes, the Black Africa. For the Africa, sorry. For my niece. Excuse me. What's the role for Africa here? We have mentioned the best examples coming from China. Yes. Now let me elaborate. How come China reached this stage? China has successfully applied the Western wisdom in a short time, in 30 years' time. And what are the Western wisdom? One is the rule of law. Secondly, advancement of science and technology. Thirdly, promotion of education. Number 4, pragmatism. Number 5, meritocracy. Number 6, market economy. So these are the principles we could learn from China. And please remember, we in Indonesia believe that God will never change you if you do not want to change yourself. So the African countries must believe China has given us the recipe: rule of law, science and technology, education, pragmatism, meritocracy, market economy, and good governance. Let's apply it in our own way. And from Asafla, you can expect solidarity, our honest solidarity, and our honest support in the United Nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will not try to complete this magnific panel. I don't know if we need another hero, as Tina Turner has sung. I like to refer to music. Maybe we need thousands of Sukarno, Nkrumahs, and many other leaders, Chavez and other ones. So we'll continue the discussion this afternoon. Thank you very much for your patience, and thank you to the